Hello and welcome to OverShadow ShadowCast. Your host Thomas Anderson. Got an hopefully exciting, interesting episode for you today with lots of stories. But we're going to talk about first something that I've been playing. So I've been playing Ash of God's Redemption, which is a very Banner Saga style game. It has been really interesting and really, really enjoyable. I have enjoyed playing it. I'm not finished yet. I think I'm just over halfway through, 65% maybe at a push, but I have been absolutely loving it. I do think that style of game as a whole needs to work on its player instruction almost. So it's a type of game where you do fight battles, but really most of the game comes from your decision making. You know, am I going to go this way? Am I going to go that way? Am I going to run out of resources? Am I going to end up missing something out? It's all about you make a decision and that has an impact. And I know I'm not going through it in too much detail, but I'll do that when I've played it, give you a proper review of it. But at the moment, I'd say that sort of type of game really needs to work on what its phrasing means. Because when you make a decision, you don't really know that's what you're doing. Like small, tiny little things make big impacts. And I just feel like it needs to point you a bit more in the direction. Because I don't mind it if you make a decision and that has an impact. But what I don't like is when you make a decision and you never get a chance to actually know what the impact is until you arrive at the effect 6 hours later, and it's something you really don't want, and then you don't want to play the game anymore. Obviously it can't signpost everything, and it does go some way. It has a special thing, a sort of symbol that comes up on the screen when you're making a decision that will have an effect, but it doesn't really give you much of a clue on what your effect is going to be. So in fact, if you look at walkthroughs for it, some decisions, people who've written a walkthrough for games like that, they don't actually know what all the effects are. So I think there does need to be a bit of work on that by that sector of the gaming industry. I think that type of game needs to be a bit more user friendly. Possibly with something that you can turn on and off for people who don't want it. But the actual game is just about you make decisions. You're trying to move across a map essentially. You make decisions. That makes it sound like Oregon Trail, sorry. But you do have fights, you do have parties, you do have to make decisions like that, and I really have been enjoying it. So I will be giving you a review of that next time I'm doing the podcast, going into a lot more detail about it. So the stories that we've got. Last week, Abigail spoke of Xbox Live Gold and the fact that you could no longer get a 12-month subscription to Xbox Live. Now, I've been doing some research into this and I think I've figured out why. It's because Microsoft, they don't like the idea that a lot of their players are having to pay for Xbox Live Gold to get certain facilities. So it's splitting the player base a bit. It's turning people off from certain things that they want them to be able to do. It's not really helping their cause. So what they're going to do is, it looks like they might be getting rid of Xbox Live Gold as a subscription service and just making it available to everyone, sort of like they did with Silver. So you'll still have the Game Pass that you'll have to pay for, but the Xbox Live Gold itself will be free. If that's what's actually happening, that's a pretty good thing. I think we can all be happy with that. So if that is what they actually do, that's a positive. It might have seemed like a negative before, but if they do that would be a great positive, and I'd support that. It does pose a problem for a lot of people that they have to subscribe to so much stuff after they've paid for games and bought a console. So this would be a big improvement, a pro-consumer improvement. Speaking of Xbox, the next story is Xbox Showcase. It came out recently, that was shown recently, it was streamed recently. It wasn't really a console showcase like PlayStation's was for me. It wasn't really. There's a lot of games, and a lot of those games will be on the Series X, but it wasn't really a showcase for a console. It was just the games they've got coming out. So hopefully we'll learn more about the console itself in the future. There wasn't much actual gameplay from the games that were shown. It was mostly cinematic trailers. And I think that the games that they showed they didn't really possess the same middle ground that PlayStation did. So they've both got smaller indie games and niche titles, and they've got their big showpieces that bring people in. But I think that PlayStation 5 had a lot of new IP that could be huge in the future, and they seem to be letting people experiment with the PlayStation, whereas I don't think that happened with Xbox. But I think that might be because a lot of these things that we saw were cinematics as opposed to gameplay. It was also significantly shorter than PlayStation's, and there weren't as many games in it, I don't believe. So I think that it could just have been that they were there, they were just sort of overlooked. I think Obsidian had a couple of things, and that was the real shining light for me in this, was Obsidian's Trifecta, where they announced it. Avowed is an Obsidian game being produced. It looks like a single player RPG, possibly. It might be multiplayer, but it looks like an RPG for sure. It's sort of like in the Elder Scrolls vein. And it's set in the Pillars universe, Pillars of Eternity. So people are going to have to go and get those if they really want to get into it. But that's not a bad thing, because if Avowed is in the Pillars universe, then there is something there that could become something. If you see what I mean, that it could be the next or another big IP for Xbox. There was also Outer Worlds DLC announced, and Grounded, which looks like a bit of a smaller game, but it looks like it could be a lot of fun. The games that were announced that stood out to me, I'll just list them all. Halo, Forza, Fable, Destiny 2's DLC or expansion, Warhammer 40k Darktide, which looks like a Vermintide but set in Warhammer universe for 40k, as opposed to the sort of fantasy side to Warhammer. Stalker 2 and Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. Those were the things that really jumped out, but we need a lot more information on them, because only Halo, I think, of that had actual gameplay, and that was, if memory serves, that was gameplay footage from a previous build, not the current build. So we need a lot more. I think it was things like that, lack of gameplay, a smaller number of games announced, that made it feel like it wasn't as powerful as the PlayStation 5's. It wasn't as big a hit. But I think that was because the way they did it meant that things were sort of like understated for some reason. So hopefully that changes, and that we see more and we start to understand what it was that we were showing before. So the last story I want to talk about is Far Cry 6. So after claiming that previous Far Cry games have been racist for years, basically since Far Cry 3 came out, which is coincidentally when Far Cry really started to take off, people have gotten angry about a whole lot of potentially racist things, or things that they have perceived as being racist that I'm not sure I necessarily agree with. I'm willing to hear them out, but I don't think I agree with them. People have gotten angry for Far Cry 6 and Ubisoft for the casting of Giancarlo Esposito. And essentially it's because he's not Latin American, he's black. Now he's famous for playing, for acting characters in TV shows and things like that quite often are Latin American or black, but essentially this is a group of people who I don't know why we don't consider it to be a belief. They really, it's not just woke people or liberal or whatever, it's a group of people who believe that you're only allowed to act your own race. So he's not allowed to act that character because of his race. Now, I don't want to call them racist, but if they don't have another name, I'm not really sure how to describe people who think that you should be pigeonholed because of your race. There's also the fact that a lot of the people who are arguing that this is racism are using the phrase Latinx, which a lot of Latin American people find racist because it implies it's a gender neutral word or phrase for Latin person, Latino, Latina. But in Latin American languages, Portuguese and Spanish mostly, they have gendered words like French. So to disgender they've basically, how would you put it, like anglicized those languages by disgendering them, or ungendering, removing the gender from a language which has gender entirely through it. Now, someday, obviously, a lot of us learning French and things like that, that is difficult to remember when something is male or female, because it doesn't necessarily follow a pattern. But I don't believe I have the right to walk into France and actually demand that they stop doing that. Otherwise, they're being whatever it is these people think that people who use gender in the language are. And a lot of people have called these people out on it, saying, I don't really care if that guy's acting that part, if he's good. Stop destroying my language. And I have to disagree with the people who are calling out Far Cry 6 for this. I mean, Ubisoft, as we've seen recently, are not necessarily fantastic. They've got a lot of things to fix, obviously. But I don't think Giancarlo Esposito's casting is one of them. He's very good. Therefore, he should be allowed to act the part. I think especially with voice acting, where you do not actually need the person to look like the character, that's where you can open it up for sure. And I know a lot of people are trying to say, well, you can't do whitewashing of roles, but whitewashing of roles is a problem. I think because white people get all the parts, not because good actors get parts that aren't their race. So I have to disagree with the people saying that this is racist. I disagree that you have to act your own race. I just disagree. I think if you're the best person for the role, that's fine. I disagree with using the phrase Latinx, because I don't understand why people are suddenly using it. Nobody's explaining that, just saying that you're being such and such if you don't. And I agree with the people who are happy for this man to be casted and don't consider Latinx to be an appropriate phrase. Because I kind of see the point. Don't remove the gender from an entire language that relies on gender. You don't have a right to do that. There was actually another point that really sort of summed up for me that people are just looking for reasons to have an argument, which was that there's a dog in the game. I think it's a DLC or a bonus content for pre-ordering. The dog is called Chorizo, which is obviously a Spanish word, and it means sausage. And they've been saying, well, this is racist. You're just picking out Spanish words and using them, and that's you're just saying that that's absolutely fine when it's not. And they're saying things like you wouldn't have a dog and you wouldn't call it sausage. Well, actually, you might. There's actually a sausage dog. Or if you had a German Shepherd, you wouldn't call it a Bratwurst. Well, you might. But even if you just look inside the realm of Far Cry 5, there are two animals in it, one named Cheeseburger and another one named Peaches. So even inside Far Cry's lore, like the extended connected series, they've called animals food words before. So if you're setting a game in a Latin American country, why not name it chorizo? Because if you're claiming that it's racist to use a Spanish word in a Spanish-speaking country, that doesn't make sense. They're not going to call a dog in a Spanish-speaking country, they're not going to call it shepherd's pie. Because that doesn't make sense. Chorizo does. So I don't consider that to be racist either, because of the pattern that it falls into. I think everybody needs to take a wee breath here. Ubisoft have done a lot wrong and there's a lot of problems and we're trying to fix them as a society, as a planet. But I do believe that there's a lot of people getting worked up over things which you can take a breath and sort out calmly. I also think that, considering a lot of the comments made by people, that this is a very, very American-centric viewpoint. Because a lot of the comments on Twitter by people who disagree with what's happened here, the casting of Giancarlo Esposito and the naming of the dog, they keep talking about white America. But the world is bigger than America. So you can't really solve a worldwide problem by thinking America is the only thing that matters. In fact, that logically would be the same problem, just with a different set of variables. It's the same issue. But I just disagree, but I thought you should know about that. I actually quite like Giancarlo Esposito, so I'm quite happy that he's in it. I personally don't believe people should be limited by their race or whatever and how they're cast. It should be whether or not they're good for the job and it's believable, and whether or not it immerses you in what's happening. I mean, Far Cry, if you want to decry Far Cry games, the stories are a wee bit copy and paste, to be honest. It's a wee bit bland as well. They sort of build a good world and then don't do anything with it. When it comes to the story, what's the point? Yeah. So there was one little thing I was going to say, that the Ghost of Tsushima has sold 2.4 million in 3 days, and apparently demand in Japan is so high that they don't have enough copies. Apparently demand is outstripping supply at the moment, probably because of the COVID lockdown making it difficult to actually make the physical game. But yeah, that's really just a small thing I wanted to mention, because the Ghost of Tsushima is something that I know people were really excited for, and it seems to have worked out very, very well. And it doesn't necessarily use massively revolutionary gameplay mechanics. It just uses previously existent mechanics better. But I've not played it. It's just what I've heard. I just wanted to mention that. Anyway, that's all for today, this week. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, please like and subscribe and click the notification bell so you're warned and alerted anytime that we post anything. You can leave a comment underneath, and you can contact us at overshadow.shadowcast@gmail.com. All comments are welcome, and any questions, and we'll answer them if we can. So hope to see you next week. Bye bye.